I never imagined I'd be standing on my back porch in my bathrobe, clutching a mug of lukewarm coffee, watching a team of strangers erect a chain-link fence around the pool I built with my own two hands. It wasn't the police seizing my property, and it wasn't the bank foreclosing on my home. It was a homeowners association that I didn't even belong to, led by a woman who believed her clipboard gave her the power of God. If you think that sounds insane, just wait until I tell you how I used a 150-year-old ghost law to turn their own bylaws against them and accidentally started a suburban revolution. My name is Cliff, and for the last 25 years, I've lived in a little slice of heaven called Oak Hollow. We aren't a development, we aren't a planned community, and we certainly aren't an estate. We're just a cluster of 6 houses on a dead-end gravel road that time forgot, tucked away on the edge of town where the asphalt turns to dirt. My house is a 1970s split level, nothing fancy, but it sits on 2 acres of land that I've poured my blood, sweat, and 401k into. The crown jewel of my property is the pool, a custom kidney-shaped beauty I installed myself about 7 years ago, complete with a natural rock waterfall and a heating system that lets me swim well into October. It was my sanctuary, the place where I washed off the grime of a 30-year career in structural engineering, a place where the only rules were no running and keep your beer cold. For years, life was perfect until the cornfields behind my tree line were sold to a developer. Over the course of a single summer, the rolling green hills were scraped raw and replaced by the gilded pines, a sprawling labyrinth of cookie-cutter McMansions that all looked like they were made of beige stucco and desperation. I didn't mind them too much at first, other than the construction noise, because I had a thick barrier of pines separating my world from theirs. I figured they'd stay on their side of the tree line, enjoying their manicured lawns and strict rules, and I'd stay on mine, enjoying my freedom. But then came Patricia Sterling. Patricia, or Patty, as she insisted on being called with a smile that never quite reached her shark-like eyes, was the president of the Gilded Pines HOA. She was a local realtor who had sold half the houses in the development and treated the entire neighborhood like her personal dollhouse. I first met her on a Tuesday afternoon in early June. I was out skimming leaves from the pool, enjoying the silence, when I heard the crunch of gravel in my driveway. I walked around the side of the house to see a silver Lexus parked right on my grass. Not the driveway, the grass. Out stepped Patty, looking immaculate in a cream-colored pantsuit, accompanied by a guy who looked like he was allergic to manual labor, holding a tablet. "Excuse me," I called out, wiping my wet hands on my shorts. "Can I help you folks? You're parked on my hydrangeas." Patty didn't even look at the flowers. She adjusted her sunglasses and beamed at me. "Good afternoon. You must be Clifford. We're just doing our quarterly compliance walkthrough for the perimeter properties. I'm Patricia Sterling, HOA president. We noticed from the upper terrace of the new builds that your pool area is, well, it's quite visible, and frankly, that rock feature is a bit of an eyesore. It doesn't adhere to the modern Mediterranean aesthetic we're cultivating." I stared at her, blinking. "I'm sorry, the what aesthetic? Lady, I don't know who you are, but I don't belong to your HOA. My property line ends at those pines. You're trespassing." She laughed, a tinkling, condescending sound that made my hackles rise. "Oh, Clifford, don't be difficult. The Gilded Pines Charter, Section 14, Paragraph B, clearly states that any property with a visual impact on the community falls under our zone of influence. It's standard practice to protect property values. We're going to need you to submit a renovation plan for that waterfall, preferably removing it, and we need to discuss the color of your pool liner. That teal is just too aggressive." I wish I could say I had a witty comeback, but I was so blindsided I just pointed to the road. "Get off my property. Now, if you come back, I'm calling the sheriff." Patty's smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of cold, bureaucratic steel. "We'll be in touch, Clifford. Noncompliance is very expensive." I thought that was the end of it. Just a crazy neighbor overstepping boundaries. I told my buddy Sully about it over beers that night. Sully is a retired welder who lives 2 doors down, a man who communicates mostly in grunts and head shakes. "Zone of influence?" Sully chuckled, crushing a can in one hand. "Sounds like a sci-fi movie. Ignore her. She can't touch us." But 2 days later, the letter arrived. It wasn't just a letter, it was a dossier. Certified mail, thick as a phone book. It outlined violations of community standards, citing my pool, my unpainted wooden deck, and even the fact that my truck was parked in the driveway overnight. The kicker was the last page, a notice of lien intent, and a bill for $4,500 in retroactive fines. They claimed that because my property bordered their development, I was subject to an easement of visual conformity that the developer had supposedly filed with the county 5 years ago. I drove straight to the county clerk's office. I spent 4 hours in the basement digging through microfiche and digital records. I found the document Patty was referencing. It was a proposal the developer had submitted to the zoning board to try and annex our road, a proposal that had been flatly rejected by the city council because our road was considered historically distinct. Patty was bluffing. She was using a rejected proposal to bully me into submission because she couldn't stand the fact that she couldn't control the view from her precious model homes. I fired back a letter, drafted by my nephew who's a paralegal, stating in no uncertain terms that they had no jurisdiction, citing the specific city council meeting minutes that rejected their annexation. I felt good. I felt like I had won. I was wrong. I underestimated the sheer, delusional persistence of a power-hungry HOA president. 2 weeks went by. The summer heat was kicking in, and I was spending every afternoon in the pool. Then came the morning that changed everything. I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery. I looked out my bedroom window and saw a bobcat loader and a crew of guys in neon vests taking down my fence, the old wooden split rail I'd had for decades, and digging post holes for a generic black aluminum fence, effectively cutting off my access to my own backyard. I didn't even put on shoes. I ran out there barefoot, screaming, "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Patty was there, of course, standing safely on the gilded pine side of the property line, holding a Starbucks cup. "Good morning, Clifford," she called out. "Since you refused to secure your pool according to our safety guidelines, the board voted to install a compliant perimeter fence. We're seizing the pool area under the attractive nuisance clause to protect the neighborhood children. Don't worry, we'll bill you for the installation." "You are stealing my land," I shouted, my face burning. "This is criminal trespass." "It's civil asset management," she corrected calmly. "And if you interfere with these contracted workers, I'll have to call the police and report you for harassment. They are just doing their jobs." I did call the police. A young deputy arrived, looked at the paperwork Patty shoved in his face, which was filled with impressive-looking stamps and legal jargon, and then looked at my deed. He scratched his head. "Look, sir," he said to me, lowering his voice. "I can tell this is messy, but she's got a document here from a judge granting a temporary emergency access order for safety mitigation. If I stop them, I'm violating a court order. You need to take this up with a judge. Until then, it's a civil matter." I stood there, helpless, watching them fence off my own pool. By noon, they had put a padlock on the gate. Patty handed the deputy a spare key and kept one for herself. "You can petition the board for access," she told me with a smirk, "once you pay the outstanding fines." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the dark outline of the fence that separated me from my property. I felt violated. I felt small. Sully came over around midnight, seeing my lights on. He didn't say much, just poured me a whiskey. "You gonna let him win, Cliff?" he asked. "I can't afford a prolonged legal battle, Sully," I admitted, head in my hands. "She knows that. She's got the HOA treasury to fund her lawyers. I'm on a fixed income." Sully took a sip of his drink and looked out the window. "You know," he said slowly, "my granddad used to say that if you can't beat the law, you gotta find an older law. This road, Oak Hollow, it used to be part of the original Miller farm, right?" "Yeah," I said, confused. So, Sully grinned, a mischievous glint in his eye. "The Miller farm wasn't just a farm. Back in the 1890s, before the town incorporated, Old Man Miller got this land designated as an unincorporated agricultural township, so he could brew moonshine legally. I remember seeing the charter in the town museum. It was never dissolved, Cliff. It just got forgotten when the city grew around it." I looked at him. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying," Sully leaned in, "that if they want to play the jurisdiction game, let's show them what real jurisdiction looks like." The next morning, I wasn't a retired engineer anymore. I was a historian on a warpath. I went back to the archives, but this time I went deep. I found it. The Charter of the Sovereign Settlement of Oak Hollow, dated 1892. It granted the residents of our road autonomous governance regarding aesthetics, livestock, and boundary disputes, and crucially, it stated that any encroaching development must pay a tithe of grain or coin or submit to the aesthetic will of the hollow elders. It was archaic, it was ridiculous, and technically, because of a clerical error in 1945, it was never formally repealed. I gathered the neighbors, all 6 of us. We held an emergency meeting in my living room and formally reactivated the Oak Hollow Town Council. I was voted mayor. Sully was sheriff. Mrs. Higgins, the cat lady from the end of the road, was appointed treasurer. We drafted our own zone of influence documents. We didn't get lawyers, we got creative. Step 1 was the beautification mandate. I sent a letter to Patty, referencing the 1892 charter, informing her that the Gilded Pines was in violation of the Oak Hollow Rustic Harmony Act. I demanded that all houses visible from our road, which was all of Patty's premium lots, must immediately cover their stucco facades with period-appropriate barnwood, or pay a fine of 3 chickens per day. Patty stormed over to my house the next day, waving the letter. "Is this a joke?" she screamed. 3 chickens? Are you insane? It's the law, Patricia, I said calmly, leaning against my front door. And since you claim jurisdiction over my pool based on visual impact, I'm claiming jurisdiction over your beige monstrosities based on historical preservation. Oh, and by the way, under the 1892 charter, you're trespassing on common grazing land. I'd suggest you move your Lexus before Sheriff Sully impounds it for his goats. She turned purple. I will sue you into oblivion. Go ahead, I said. But while the courts figure it out, I'm enacting the auditory defense protocol. That was step 2. Sully, being a welder, had some interesting scrap metal. He built a series of wind chimes. But these weren't soothing, tinkling chimes. They were massive, industrial-grade steel pipes that clanged like church bells in a hurricane whenever the wind blew. We hung them right along the property line. We also started the Oak Hollow Bagpipe Appreciation Society, with practice held every morning at 6 a.m., right when the Gilded Pines residents were trying to sleep. The best part? Because we were technically an agricultural township under the old charter, standard noise ordinances didn't apply to farm equipment or cultural practices. The war raged for 3 weeks. Patty sent lawyers, but they got bogged down trying to decipher the validity of a handwritten charter from the 19th century. Meanwhile, the residents of Gilded Pines were cracking. They didn't care about the legal battle. They cared that they were being woken up by bagpipes and looking at the giant, neon-pink scarecrows we had erected along the fence line facing their patios. I started getting emails from Patty's neighbors. Not hate mail, but pleas for help. Please, one read, "We hate the beige stucco too. We just want to sleep. Patty won't listen to us." That's when I realized the flaw in Patty's armor. She wasn't leading a united army. She was ruling a kingdom of hostages. I decided to go for the kill shot. I printed out flyers, hundreds of them. They detailed the thousands of dollars Patty was spending from the HOA Reserve Fund to fight a legal battle against 6 old people and a ghost charter, while neglecting the actual maintenance of the Gilded Pines common areas. I included copies of the invoices for the fence she illegally built on my land. I titled the flyer, "Where are your HOA dues going?" Hint, it's not the pool. Sully and I did a midnight run, taping these flyers to every mailbox in the Gilded Pines. The next evening was the monthly Gilded Pines HOA meeting. Usually, these meetings were sparsely attended affairs where Patty dictated the color of mulch. Tonight, the parking lot of the community center was full. I walked in, not in a bathrobe, but in my Sunday best. Sully was with me, wearing a cowboy hat and a tin badge that said sheriff. Patty was at the podium, looking frazzled. When she saw me, she pointed a shaking finger. You have no right to be here. This is a private meeting." "Actually," I boomed, my voice carrying to the back of the room. "According to the Gilded Pines bylaws, which I read very carefully, non-members can address the board if they are parties of interest in an active dispute." And boy, do we have a dispute. The crowd murmured. A guy in the front row stood up. It was the guy who had emailed me. "Let him speak, Patty. We want to hear why we're paying for lawyers to fight a guy who just wants to swim in his own pool." Patty banged her gavel. "Order. I will have you removed." "I'd like to see you try," I said, walking to the front. I turned to the crowd. I looked them in the eyes, tired parents, stressed commuters, people who just wanted a home. "Folks," I said, "I don't hate you. I don't even hate your houses, though the beige is a bit much. I'm just a guy who built a pool to relax in. Your president here decided that wasn't enough. She trespassed, she fenced off my land, and she spent your money doing it. I'm willing to drop my chicken tax and take down the wind chimes today. All I want is my yard back. But Patty here, she'd rather burn your money than admit she's wrong. The room went silent. Then, a woman in the back stood up. I move for a vote of no confidence in the president. Seconded, shouted the guy in the front. Patty looked like she'd been slapped. You can't do this. I created this community. All in favor? The treasurer asked, ignoring her. Every hand in the room went up. Even the guy Patty had brought with her to my house that first day raised his hand, looking sheepish. The aftermath was swift and satisfying. The new board, led by the guy who liked my pool, his name was Dave, a decent guy, signed a formal agreement acknowledging the permanent independence of Oak Hollow. They brought a crew out the very next day to tear down the chain-link fence. They even offered to pay for the damages to my lawn, but I told them to keep the money and use it to plant some actual trees on their side of the line. As for Patty, she didn't go quietly. She tried to sue the HOA for wrongful termination, but that only revealed that she had been funneling landscaping kickbacks into her personal account. Last I heard, she moved 2 towns over and is terrorizing a condo board in a retirement community. The victory was sweet, but the best moment came about a week later. It was a scorching Saturday. I was in my pool, floating on a raft, a cold drink in the holder. I heard a noise at the property line. I looked over to see Sully, Dave, the new president, and a few other neighbors from Gilded Pines standing there, looking awkward. Hey Cliff, Dave said, holding a cooler. It's about 95 degrees out here. We were wondering, since we respected the Rustic Harmony Act and took down the fence, is there any chance the treaty includes swimming rights? I looked at them. I looked at the empty, quiet pool. I grinned. Only if you brought beer. And leave the rulebook at the door. That afternoon, my backyard wasn't a battlefield. It was a neighborhood. We had music, we had burgers, and for the first time, the line between Oak Hollow and Gilded Pines didn't feel like a fortress wall. It just felt like a line in the grass where friends met. But here's the thing that still keeps me up at night, and I want you guys to tell me if I'm crazy in the comments. A few months ago, Dave came by. He's a good guy, but he had a clipboard. He said, "Hey Cliff, since we're all getting along now, and you're technically part of the community fabric, the board was wondering if you'd consider chipping in for the road paving. Just a voluntary contribution, of course." I saw that glint in his eye, that same bureaucratic gleam that Patty had. It made me realize that maybe it wasn't just Patty. Maybe it's the power. Maybe the moment you give a group of people a clipboard and a little bit of authority over their neighbors, they can't help but try to expand their kingdom. I told Dave to get off my porch before I reactivated the Bagpipe Society. He laughed, but he didn't put the clipboard away immediately. So, tell me, did I win, or did I just trade a tyrant for a slower, friendlier encroachment? And strictly speaking, if you discovered an ancient law that let you fine your annoying neighbors and livestock, would you use it? I think we all know the answer to that. Let me know what you do in the comments below. Stay free, folks, and keep your fences high.